As a woman traveling through the wellness space in midlife, you have inevitably heard about the importance of strength training. And no one is going to argue that strength training is incredibly crucial at midlife. And when women come to work with me, I find they're doing one of three things, or maybe all three things. They're either doing cardio, they're doing strength, or they're doing flexibility work. But the thing that I don't hear a lot of women doing is mobility work. And there is a big difference between flexibility and mobility. And today I want to talk about the difference. Welcome to your daily hit of grace and grit, your quick dose of inspiration to kickstart your day. I'm Courtney Townley, and here is today's hit. So if you have ever finished a good stretching session, or maybe you've had something like a Thai massage and you feel really loose and supple afterwards, but then the next day you wake up and you feel just as tight as you did before, you've experienced the difference between flexibility and mobility, even if you didn't have a name for it. So flexibility is passive. It's how far a muscle can lengthen when you apply an external force, like gravity or your hands or someone else's hands. Mobility, on the other hand, is the ability to move a joint through a full range of motion under your own muscular control. So there's muscular contraction involved in mobility work. And in midlife, mobility definitely becomes the one that protects you. It keeps you functional, it keeps your lymph flowing, it reduces pain, and it prevents injury. So today I want to explain why and give you some practical things to work with. First, I'll tell you that I don't think I could even really name the difference between flexibility and mobility work until I started working with Ido Portal years ago. I spent about a decade training with him and his team. And we never did flexibility work. We always did mobility work. So we were always actively strengthening and stretching at the same time. So I wasn't just sitting on the floor holding a pose. I was actively moving in and out of a range of motion to help my muscles become more supple. And looking back, like now that I understand that, looking back in my earlier years, I really think that's why dancers tend to be so flexible, because in my dance career, I can now see that so much of what we were doing was mobility training, right? So we were actively moving through a wild range of motion that both strengthened our muscle tissue and stretched our muscle tissue simultaneously. So here's why the distinction matters so much in midlife. After 40, and especially through perimenopause, we begin to lose collagen, the structural protein in our connective tissues. And this affects, of course, all of our connective tissues, our tendons, our ligaments, our cartilage, and our joint capsules themselves. The joints become less cushioned and less lubricated. And if you've ever experienced that directly, like, if you felt it, it doesn't feel good. And the connective tissue becomes less elastic. So passive stretching addresses muscle length. I wouldn't even say it addresses it well, but it does address it on some level. But it does not train the muscles to actively control the movement within that range. So there's a difference between laying on my back and holding my leg up in the air with a yoga strap and just passively stretching versus standing vertically and kicking my leg forward to stretch my hamstring, right? In the latter example, I have to engage my hip flexors to lift my leg up in order to stretch my hamstring. And there's a little bit of like energy and power behind the stretch, which means you might be flexible to get into a position, but not strong enough to stabilize the position. That's the difference between flexibility and mobility. The instability is where injury happens. So mobility work is very different than flexibility work. It teaches your nervous system to own the range of motion, not just by being flexible, but by controlling your flexibility with muscular contraction, to move through flexibility with control and strength and coordination. So hip circles, controlled articular rotations, yoga flows that require muscular engagement rather than passive hanging. These are all examples of mobility training. And they train the joint to be both mobile and stable and strong. And that combination is really what keeps a midlife body resilient. I'll read a little bit of research here from the Journal of Aging and Physical Activity. Found that targeted mobility training in women over 40 produced significant improvements in functional movement, joint stability, and self-reported pain. Outcomes that were not replicated to the same degree with static stretching alone. The researchers noted that the neuromuscular component of mobility work, training the body and the brain to coordinate movement through a range, appears to be the critical variable. So here's your takeaway. If you currently stretch, I'm not saying stop, keep at it, but add 5 to 10 minutes to those sessions of active mobility work, maybe 3 times a week, right? I mean, mobility work you could do every day if you wanted to. So what does it look like exactly? Well, this is probably where I should do a video of me actually practicing and showing you some mobility drills. I actually have some of this inside of the membership. Those of you who are listening who are members, if you go into the movement vault, there are mobility drills in that movement vault. But it looks like controlled leg circles, like laying on your back and circling your leg above your hip with control. It looks like deep squat holds with active engagement. Right? Squatting into a deep squat, like ass to grass on the towards the ground, and holding it at the bottom for a little bit before you stand back up, and then going back into that. A deep squat is mobility work. Cat-cow, right? Which a lot of people are used to doing from yoga, on all fours on the floor, rounding your back up into a cat position and then extending into the cow. That is mobility work. Shoulder circles, right? Like really actively trying to create huge ranges of motion with your shoulder joint is mobility work. You're not just lengthening tissue with mobility work. You're training your nervous system to own the space that your body moves through with muscular control. And that ownership is what keeps you moving freely at 50, 60, and well beyond. And it's available to you right now, wherever you're starting from. It's practicing deeper ranges of motion in movement with control. And obviously, I'm not encouraging you to force yourself into unhealthy ranges. But there's, again, a big difference between a static stretch and actually moving yourself through space in a way that requires both flexibility and strength. Something to think about. If this stirred something inside of you, imagine what a whole book of clarity and courage could ignite. The Consistency Code, a midlife woman's guide to deep health and happiness, goes even deeper into the mindset and practices that create real, meaningful change at midlife. Grab your copy today over at theconsistencycode.com and keep the momentum alive.